I know it says live, but it's not live, but it is live. It's just not confirming it here. There we go. All right, good. All right, call to order this regular meeting of the Eastern Reading Region 9 Joint Boards of Education Policy Committee at 9:07 a.m. Members in attendance, Maureen Williams, Chris Parkin, and Stephanie Pearson-Ugal, as well as myself. Also in attendance, our interim superintendent, Tom McMorrin. And it looks like we have one member of the public. First item on our agenda, item number 2, actually, the approval of minutes from the July 16th. Now, we didn't have quorum.
You didn't have quorum, and there are no minutes.
So no minutes, no quorum. Moving on to public comment gives us an opportunity. So I think it's Morna. If you are able to either turn on your video and wave at us to let us know that you'd like to make public comment, or use the participant window to indicate your intention to make public comment.
I don't have comment.
All right, very good. All right, thank you. And that takes us to committee member comments.
Well, it's good to see you guys.
Good to see you
Good to see you too, Tom. We've made a lot of progress since you were last here.
Yes, good. Yes, good on you.
But we're still doing it
Well,
every week.
Every week.
Well, keep on focus, keep moving.
Chipping away. That'll take us to discussion of possible actions. We have 3 items here: CABE model policy review, administrative updates, and tri-board governance. I have quite a bit teed up to dig into on the tri-board governance front. We had left it on the sort of conversation of various scenarios that we could lay out to show the sort of the policies that we'd come up with in action, and to make them real, and to create scenarios that would allow the board members to sort of dig on that. So I have plenty that could keep us busy on that subject today. But before we dive into that, I want to give anyone an opportunity, if anyone has anything on the CABE model policy updates. I know that there have been a number of sort of CABE policy updates, and then additionally, and probably related to that, the administrative updates. So Stephanie or Tom, anything, or Chris, it looks like you maybe have
I
something.
had sort of a general comment about the CABE policies that I think is going to become relevant in the next month or so in the community. And that is a reminder that we adopted the CABE model policy with respect to mask wearing in schools, and that policy delegates the superintendent the authority to turn on and turn off mask requirements. And my understanding is no revisions to that have come either statutorily or through CABE or anywhere else. And so I don't think we will be proposing any changes to that going into the next school year.
Good. Anyone else have anything on the CABE front? Okay. Administrative update?
So my administrative update is simply a reminder that this summer we need to tackle the changes that need to be in place with respect to school lunches and the responsibilities of the vendor to change their practice for students who have a negative balance or zero balance, and the provision of meals for those students. And that's something that this policy committee should take on in the next several weeks. And in addition to that, there's a legislative update for school climate. So we need to look at all of our policies that include some aspect of school climate, including bullying and harassment, discrimination, and take a look at the overlap of those policies in order to provide an update.
And would your recommendation be that we essentially spend, maybe our next session, maybe next Friday, dedicated to a working session on that, or would you like to dive in now?
I think, frankly, a working session with all of the printed copies might be useful to mark them up as a group. I actually envision almost like a wall of these policies so we can look at common words. I'm happy to do that electronically. I don't personally have the skill to do that. But in some form, I think that this group needs to come together, perhaps even a working group of the policy committee, to come back and then facilitate the next discussion with a recommendation of how some of these policies might be merged, and then where they need to stand alone. and then also incorporate the new language and new definitions that are coming from the state.
Okay.
So I don't think we're in a position to do that today.
Right.
And I have a conflict next Friday, but in
Okay.
general, I'd like to find a date for this group to do that work.
So perhaps the following Friday, we can spend some time with the sort of larger group, and in between, inside of the next 2 weeks, I would propose maybe it's a working group of just the two of us, because I think I can do the sort of electronic version of the conspiracy board. See the strings going from here to here and here to here. I think we'll probably just do it in Google Sheets and just sort of put them next to each other. Here's our current, here's the proposed, and sort of looking at the deltas. And then we could bring that back to the rest of the committee. Does that?
Terrific. So
seem
I
like-
will, yeah, sorry, go
No,
ahead.
Go ahead.
So I do have all of those policies, so I have them printed out. So I will send them as one batch to you, John, so
Perfect.
that you have all of them and can lay them out next to one another.
Perfect. All right. Sounds good. Great. And then for the items, for the recent change to law that relates to the sort of non-shaming, I think is that a more discrete piece that we could take perhaps next, well, you won't be here next Friday, but the
Well, you
following
could take
Friday?
it on next
Yeah,
Friday.
okay.
My understanding was that you started that work. You began
We
to
did.
draft a
We
policy.
did, and our policy was going not quite there, but close to there.
That's right.
We had a non-shaming element in our own policy, so.
Before the
We had a
law.
lengthy
That's right.
discussion about shaming.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Good. So if we come back to that next Friday, then it sounds like that will work. And then I think we'd be sending that to each of our boards in hopes of getting a sort of first reading, and second reading, and then ultimately enshrining it as policy. I did have one other question. Oh, with relation to the sort of non-shaming piece of the equation, is there an intersection between the recent change that we saw to the pricing with our was it school bucks vendor? Is it likely that we're going to find more scenarios where that policy is going to need to be put into place because of that change? Has anyone looked at that?
My school bucks increased their per transaction charge from, I think,
Right.
every time you add money to your account, it's $250. Every time now it's $275 or something. And that's
Right.
another area we had a conversation about, because the limit of $100 a shot is problematic because it's, a 3% tax.
That's right.
You know.
Right. It's a regressive tax.
Right. Yeah. And if you're only putting $20 at a time, you're getting charged 12% basically. So
Right.
it becomes
Right.
absurd.
So
So-
perhaps that's a conversation you want to include our director of finance in
Yep.
and discuss how that might be renegotiated.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. Very good. Well, then I think that takes us to our tri-board agreement, and the idea of how can we govern ourselves better when we're working together as a set of three boards, which I think is a very timely topic. As we have been focused more in general on how can we reduce the administrative burden, especially when it comes to the burnout factor for our administrators in central office. So I will share my screen just to catch everyone up. The intent, the hope is that we can get together as a set of three boards and dive into these questions of tri-board governance. One of the pieces, one of the big pieces of work that we did is to try to just define each category and each sort of important sort of point where there could be any misunderstanding in terms of selecting a chair, recording minutes, et cetera, et cetera. I think we had something like 25 items, and that was inclusive of, relatively minor things such as the, selecting of a chair and sort of the procedural points there, process there, and then more meaty subjects like the resolution of issues and what mechanisms are available to us to resolve issues. In order to bring these policies to life and not put everyone to sleep, our hope is that we can get people involved in a series of sort of exercises where we, if we have 21 members that are there, that we break up into mock boards and create a scenario where we say, okay, board A and board B are satisfied with the current service delivery of name the hypothetical food services, buses, whatever else we might choose. But board C is not. Here are the parameters for that scenario. How does our policy recommendations play out in that scenario? Same thing for if we have state mandates for including some piece in the curriculum, and we're getting recommendation from central office, but one of the boards is sort of stuck on sort of one point. How do we resolve that? And then finally, something like a lease for central office or something like that. So trying to cover a sort of broad set of likely scenarios, and to get into conversations that aren't necessarily tied to current active controversy. So anyone have questions about the sort of the basics of the exercise? Yes, Maureen.
I don't really have questions about the exercise per se, just about the choice to do sort of less controversial topics in your gaming out. I think that if you work from less controversial topics to more controversial ones, you actually show people a little bit more of the depth of why you need to do this work. And maybe you made a different choice to sort of get people comfortable. And I agree with that, but I also agree with the idea that you progress to the tough stuff when you game it out, because when people get entrenched in the tough stuff, you might move some minds about why you need to do this to begin with.
I think that's a point well made. And I think it might be too easy for some who would dismiss the need for us to write down a policy. It might be easy for them to dismiss that and say, oh, when this comes up, we'll just figure it out. And if we can point out a relatively thorny topic where, well, okay, show me how that just works itself out in this particular area. I would argue, and maybe it's two things happening. It's disagreement amongst the boards, as well as where is the appropriate spot for board members versus central office. This seems to be the sort of the most thorny to me. I would say this is maybe the least thorny, sort of the least for central office. Then
Right.
Slightly more thorny is we're not happy with fill in the blank on a service. And then I would argue the most thorny is a question of curriculum.
Right, probably.
Does that ring
Yeah.
true to others? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we wanted to have a progression, I think we could do that, like something like that.
I also can anticipate you wanting to game something out that has a lone holdout kind of scenario, or something within the boards where one person has an outsized opinion, but seems to be persuasive somehow, or gets the group back to a different point just because they have an outlier opinion. And I don't know how necessarily you do that, but I see that scenario as getting in the way of consensus sometimes.
Yep. Okay. I think that the intent would be that that's baked into one or more of these.
Okay.
Yep. So I think that makes sense. So are any concerns with any one of these, or with the exercise overall? And I know, Tom, this is probably most new to you. Anyone else have sort of thoughts about? And I'm sorry, Tom, I don't know why Maureen and Chris did not.
Well, I've got it on my screen for Tom, so that's the.
Okay. Here we go. I also just you're supposed to tell me to zoom in. We have an agreement about
Yeah,
that.
but it's very nicely sized today, John. To me, it is.
Okay. All right. If we're comfortable,
My primary question at this point is, as we're sitting here on July 23rd, what the arc is on this with respect to timing, and when we're trying to get folks together to have consensus, because I'm getting a strong burnout sense from a lot of folks on my board, at least,
Yeah.
with respect to the number of meetings we've had over the past 18 months and just the continued slog, as we now have 3 ongoing personnel searches, whatever it is across the districts. I want to make sure this work is done meaningfully by people who are in the right state of mind to do it.
Yeah.
And
Yes,
so that becomes the question as to when are we doing this? We had talked in the distant past about doing a retreat in August to do it. In the context of the superintendent search also ongoing, I don't know if anybody's going to be in the right frame of mind to do it in August.
Right. I agree with that. I would think best case scenario, we would look at a September, October.
I mean, you could
and
make
then
it
given
part
the
of
upcoming
October's tri-board
elections
meeting,
and
but-
some shifts, do you want to do that?
Right. Wait until you have your new board seated in December.
Or at least elected?
Well, I mean, I wonder if you don't do it before that to establish norms that can then be
Maybe.
carried over to new board members.
Maybe you do.
Okay.
Or maybe
Because
you do
also
it
gives you
twice.
the ability to make outgoing board members have sort of a useful role in this, in as much as they've seen the wars, but they don't have a vested interest in the future of the war. And can be a little bit more dispassionate than somebody who is going to hold over having the same argument for years going forward. And to the extent that we're going to basically try to memorialize an MOU on a biennial basis, it provides sort of that first draft to start working through.
Okay. I'm gonna create a space for each of these, and then let's talk about what this actually looks like. If we're going to let's say that we're carving up the boards, and it's just gonna be 7, 7, and 7, and we're going to assign board B and C. You're going to be in favor of extending the lease. Board A, you're going to want to move to a new location. What are the core facts that we need? I mean, is there anything beyond that we need to articulate to dive into an actual conversation?
Perhaps you want to split up the boards from their existing configurations to
That's the intent.
That's why A, B, and C are in there.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're random draw to 3 boards.
random
right.
draw. Okay.
And then I
And you
think
probably also randomly assigned chairs to each 3
Right.
for the exercise.
right.
Okay.
Have you considered an outside of facilitator to work on this with you? Someone who, so that the board members don't have to also be running the session, and someone who can, be your umpire?
We have.
Yeah. Okay.
We have considered that, but we have not gone through the process of actually investigating who would do that exactly. So we'd be very open to suggestions about who could do that. Okay. Any other elements? Random draw of board members and chairs, and I think that's sort of an overarching principle of each one of these scenarios. Anything else? Okay, so let's hit the policy pieces or the governance language, and let's see if we can come up with a sort of highlight. And I'm just to make this easy, I'm just gonna have a scenario A. B. And scenario C. So the question is, to what extent are we able to articulate these policies? Are we able to show them in sort of actually working? I don't know if there's a huge need for us to do that for selecting a chair, but it'd be trivial to do that, right? If we simply say A is currently the chairing board, whoever is drawn as the chair of the A board, they become the chair for that. So we could say in each one of these scenarios, it's a relatively trivial matter to illustrate that principle, right? So good. Okay. Recording minutes. Yes. That's an enthusiastic yes.
Yeah.
From the
So
canine
catch me
community.
up. I'm sorry. I'm confused. I'm not sure what you're doing now.
Yep. So the intent here is to illustrate. So these are the actual recommendations for governance language related to when the 3 boards are meeting together. So we have basic sort of documentation around who's the chair when the three boards get together and meet? What is the practice for that? Who is the secretary? How how do you come together to set a regular meeting schedule? How do you do this? So in this
Good.
case,
Good.
in these scenarios, you would have a chair, you would have somebody doing minutes, but you would not. This would not be applicable.
This is an exercise in which of these governance pieces are applicable to each of the three scenarios.
Correct. And the reason that I want to go through this process is
Good.
I want to light up as many as possible. And if that means we got to go back and change the scenarios to light up more of these items, good. Also, if we're only lighting up the same, 6 things,
We got to change the process, right?
exactly. Right. So this is NA, joint meeting of the 3 boards. We could bake that into one or more of the scenarios, right? This is,
Right.
let's
So
actually
the one
be-
where one board is dissatisfied with the service is one where one board is requesting the meeting.
I think that's right. All right, good. So requesting a joint meeting of the 3 boards, we'll say the service one. Good. Setting an agenda. Right. Thinking through the whole life cycle. Like, I love the idea of we're in the room and this is not a meeting of the 3 boards called to order. This is, right. This person has said, this board has said, we're not happy and with this service and we want a meeting. That could play really nicely into the agenda formulation of the agenda as well. Yeah. Okay. Committee charge is not relevant. Governance agreement. What is this? This is, no, not relevant.
Well, I mean, if you wanted to, because we didn't have any of these things arising from a committee. What was the curriculum hypothetical?
The curriculum hypothetical is
About coding.
Yeah, I mean, and I just put coding because I was trying to think of something that's not there that could be there in the future, that the state says you have to do this, but you can do it this way or this way. And
should it arise from a recommendation of the curriculum committee? Like, we don't have a joint ER9 curriculum committee.
yeah. No, that's actually a good point.
So I'm wondering if one of these actions should arise out of a joint committee in some way. I mean, you could just make it a policy that was recommended, that the policy committee recommended adopting a, coding curriculum or something, which wouldn't make sense, but I'm trying to just find
What about the transportation committee or the food service committee for the service one?
See, the difference to me is in one scenario, it's the A board is upset about the service provider, but if it's the joint committee being upset about the service provider, that carries a different level of weight to me. And it suggests that all 3 boards have an issue.
What if we're talking about the joint committee, let's just for the, this is not the case, so everyone knows, but let's just imagine a world in which we weren't happy with the bus company and but one board is not happy with the bus company. The transportation committee recommends a renewal of the contract. 2 boards agree, 1 does not. So you get a little bit of the interplay of what is the role of a
Right.
joint committee.
So the joint committees make the recommendation, and then there's an issue once the recommendation is brought back.
Correct. Does that seem to work?
That doesn't seem outside the realm of possibility.
No, I'm pretty sure that happens. Right. So, okay. So I think that's going to be joint committee. We could hit that there, right? Because you could start the scenario. This also helps with the sequencing of this, because you can have, the sort of committee members reporting back to the respective boards. With that, hey, we're going to make this recommendation when we next meet together as a tri-board. And one of those boards can say, hold on a second, we don't like that because we don't like A, B, or C. Now we come back to that meeting. So we can cover the individual committee members reporting back. No need to do that one. Acting on committee recommendations, that's live in that scenario. No, not relevant, not relevant, not relevant. Well, no, actually, operational contracts. Would that fits, right? Okay. Sorry. This cannot be allowed not to be centered. There we go. Central office budget, nope. Okay, I think that's it.
Is this spreadsheet shared, John?
It should be. No, it's not. That's surprising. There you go.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay. All right. So it feels, I mean, it feels like we have a really nice sort of path for the service one.
If there were an outside facilitator explaining this process to them, could also enable them to provide you with some feedback about sequencing, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I expect that any kind of experienced facilitator is going to have their own bag of tricks and their own sort of process for how they go through this. So it may be that we're not talking about 3 scenarios at all. It may be that, you know, it's here's my bag of tricks and we are saying, wonderful, love that. We want you to do all of that. We would also like for you to take us through and help to facilitate this scenario. And that depending on how much time we're spending on that, it may be that we're only talking about 1 scenario, which, you know, wouldn't be the end of the world, but yeah.
I don't have particular people in mind for the facilitator, but I would just suggest that it's someone who has a little bit a level of command and control over people who may get out of line.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Clearly nobody that we know.
You're out of line.
I'm always out of line.
You know, I like this work a lot, and my commendations to you for generating the list and for working on this. I do think that it's what I like about it is you're trying to work on systems, not people. That I think the more you build it, we can certainly find a skilled, experienced facilitator who can say, I know what you want to do, and I'm going to help you get through it, and then relieve any of you from having to, you know, play both roles. I'm already thinking of a few people who could do this for you.
That's great. That's very, very helpful, Tom. Thank you. Okay, so maybe we'll go quickly through this because I don't know that we're necessarily going to end up with you know, with all 3 highlighting. I'm actually really pleased with how many we were able to highlight for service. So let's just take a quick run through on the lease and the curriculum question. See if we have anything else. I don't think there's any. Committee member assignments. No. Do we have a joint committee for anything related to the lease?
Yeah, we have an ad hoc central office committee.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's the only thing that it's for?
It's not just for, well, I believe the ad hoc committee was set up on a short-term basis for the purpose of determining whether or not to renew the lease at central office. And my understanding is that work didn't formally conclude, so the committee stays sort of semi-open at this point.
Okay.
Region 9 committee.
From last year.
Yeah.
Outside of real property lease agreements, I don't see anything new for the lease scenario. Oh, well, resolution of issues. That, I mean, all 3 of these, that could be, I mean, that's a part of it. Okay. And that could and probably will include the recess option. Okay. Are we at all interested in simulating a public comment and board member comment that would require testing of these policies?
Yes.
All right. Any preference? Lease, service, or curriculum?
All.
Yeah, but it's so
Curriculum.
hard to think of a way to simulate this, though.
Yeah, there is. I think there is a way to simulate it. And you know what? There's some board member training that has to occur in terms of how you respond to public comment without responding, you know, directly. And also, I mean, and it's off topic, we need some more guardrails in general enshrined in our policy about the length of certain types of public comment.
And I think that the frustration or the trap we fall into is that all three boards are governed by their own bylaws. And when they're meeting jointly, it is the least restrictive rules that have to govern. And so all three boards have to find a way to come around putting guardrails on that are at least substantially similar to avoid questions about, well, your comment is violative of the Easton rules, but not the Reading rules. So we have to listen to it because the Reading rules are more permissive.
Yeah, that's right. And we have actually run into that a couple of times when we've talked about the, constraining the sort of the time for public comments. And because it has become a practice that we've been trying to keep it to 2 minutes, and and largely we've been able to do that. At the beginning of the meetings. I think the guidance that we've received is that everybody has to do that if you want to make that the norm when the board's meeting together. Okay. All right. So I don't think that there's anything else to do on this sheet right now. I think what would be, so the way that I would look at this is the sequencing of these items, starting with something like individual committee members. I think this would probably be the first step in the process. We envision individual committee members, and let me just, this is going to be helpful, actually. I'm going to replace the Ys with numbers. I think.
Well, I don't even think that is, so what you're pursuing there is, I'm on the transportation committee. I report back to board A. Here's what the transportation committee is talking about and is recommending. Then there's a joint meeting for the purpose of acting upon the recommendation of the transportation committee, whereupon everything else sort of goes off.
Correct. That's right. And so I think this
so you're in the scenario, you're presupposing the existence of the joint committees already. You're not going through the steps of charging it with anything.
No. We can.
I mean, if you wanted to hit every single thing in the arc, you do that, but I think that sort of is like watching paint dry for the purpose of the exercise.
Yeah, and I think this will already feel onerous to people who are sort of policy averse. So, yeah.
We have to get them to see policy and procedure as really interrelated, and then there'll be less policy events.
Yeah, I think that's right. 7, 8. 9, 10, 11. Okay, good. That's great. Well, so I think that scenario has written itself now, which is good. I can put that on the slide. I can, the idea would be that I grab each one of these pieces of language and then sort of write the scenario like, okay, here's, in order to illustrate this, first the boards are doing this, but I don't know if that's particularly good.
I would hesitate to jump into making a slide deck that's perfect until we figure out if we're having a facilitator have a conversation with them, because they'll be able to sort of work through that, I think.
Yeah, good. And especially if they will do that work, be wonderful. Okay. All right, good. So let me, the one other piece that we had on here, in addition, sort of the various scenarios, is an actual review of each policy. I don't know if that means we do the scenarios, we illustrate some of the policies, and then we show all the policies, or we start by showing all the policies in terms of sequence. Does anyone have some point of view about that?
I think you have to, well, if you start by saying, here's all the policies, you allow folks to start nitpicking the policies that come together.
Start by why we have a problem.
Right. And then I think you can work through each of these issues organically in a way that's going to prove that what we put together is not controversial. And then once you've sort of done that by example, you get to the end and say, here's a summary of everything we've learned and talked about. Can we all agree that these are the operating rules and the rules of engagement for our 3 boards? Everyone's been hesitant to have rules of engagement. You've just all agreed to all of these basic principles.
Right.
So let's memorialize all these basic principles because that allows us to move forward.
Right. I think generally the sentiment that I've detected in these conversations has been that people are supportive of that, with only a couple of detractors.
It's easy to be supportive until you see the actual language, and then you start nitpicking the actual language.
Well, and I think it's one of these things. I mean, and you get into it most, and we've talked about this at length in these conversations where we were exploring these options for resolving conflict. You get into it most when right now there are people who are actively saying, if we disagree about this in the midst of sort of conflict today amongst the 3 boards, there is no mechanism who, if we rewind the tape, 5 years or 3 years, there is a mechanism and we're using it to compel your action. And so like that doesn't work. That's just not how this stuff should work, that you get to pick when it benefits you. So, okay. So I don't think there's anything else for us to do here, but to look for recommendations for folks who could help us sort of go through this process and then sort of dig in with them to see their appetite for continuing down this path and ability to sort of bring this to life. So I would say we put the rest of this on hold until we have those conversations. I think looking for a time, I agree with the idea that we're looking at a sort of September, October thing. I think that makes sense. So
Can I request, John, that you as the chair work with Tom to discuss any facilitators and figure out if there's a consensus way to do that?
Yes.
And I think that also sort of dovetails with our broader questions about board professional development and the extent to which ESSER grants can be used for some of those needs.
yeah, agreed. All right. Good. Anybody have anything else on this topic? I'm not above it.
I'm impressed with the good work you've accomplished. Nice job.
Thanks, Tom. All right. If there's nothing else, then I think we're going to public comment. I think we may have lost our. This is the problem with the policy committee is we bore people and they go, oh, there's nothing interesting going on here. I'm out of here. So
much more critical thinkers to see what we're really doing.
Yeah, we'll go to committee member comment.
Welcome back, Tom.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Policy pals.
Yeah, this is not edged out Survivor on
We get along really well. Survivor people are always like this.
Right. Maybe that's why we need to eat bugs and backstab more, and then we get better ratings. All right. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you very much. What's the best way, Chris? You're saying absent objection? Absent
objection. And the chair has unilateral authority to adjourn under Roberts without a motion. But absent objection, it's by unanimous consent. You can do it. That's fine.
Excellent. And that's because the more recent change that allows for these types of meetings require a roll call vote.
Correct. So the way I've interpreted the roll call vote requirement is absent unanimous consent. You've got to take that roll call vote. And so for procedural motions, I've taken as much as unanimous consent as possible. But for substantive things, even if it's unanimous, I'm taking it by roll.
Right. Yep. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. So absent objection, we will be adjourned here at 9:45 a.m. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Guys.